Another bonus episode. Guys, we were so lucky to have a chance to sit down with Evan Drellich, who wrote the book, Winning Fixes Everything. That's the book that we read for the Astros episode, McKinsey Strikes Out. Evan Drellich is a senior writer for The Athletic. He broke the story of the Houston Astros cheating scandal alongside his colleague, Ken Rosenthal. He covered the Astros for the Houston Chronicle from 2013 to 2016. He grew up in New York City, and he attended the real BU, Binghamton University, the premier public university in the Northeast. He now lives in Queens. Okay, here's our interview with Evan.
Speed.
Welcome back to another episode of the Corporate Gossip Podcast, a special bonus episode. My name is Becca Platsky. I'm CPA scorned and the host of the Corporate Gossip Podcast. I'm here with my co-host and my brother,
Data analytics playboy, Adam Platsky.
And we're here with a very special guest. I think most importantly, he's a Binghamton University alumni. And secondly, most important, he is the author of the book that we read for our Astros podcast, Winning Fixes Everything, Evan Drellich.
Thanks, guys.
So let's dive into it. You ready?
Sure.
So at the end of all of our episodes, we call out the heroes. And often those heroes are journalists and whistleblowers. And this case was no different. You, along with your reporting partner and Mike Fiers, were the ones that were brave enough to call out a turd, even though that turd was painted in gold. And the immediate impacts of your reporting were clear in the aftermath of the cheating scandals and the rules changes. But now that it's been a few years, I'm curious if you've seen any other long-term impact of your work, on the culture of the clubhouses, the controls in place at the commissioner level.
Yeah, I mean, they changed the pitch calling system. Besides the playing rules element of it, which is significant, I do think there might be a little more cognizance in front offices of how they're treating people, maybe of the culture that they're building. I don't want to go too far with that and say that they're all enlightened now and are putting human equity first, because they're not. But I do think there were some, when I look around, even with public reception, not necessarily what the executives themselves are doing, I think people look at lead executives and there might be a little bit less fetishizing of innovation. We still love it. There's still a lot of people who love it, but maybe just a little bit more of a sober assessment of executive worship.
It's, what it kind of reminds me of? We did an episode earlier this season on the WWE, and a lot of these wrestlers are working in a place where, it's their dream to work for the WWE. And it was almost this idea of you can't be exploited if you're working your dream job. And it seemed very similar to a lot of working in the front office of, Astros or other MLB teams, where it's yeah, exploitation is fine because you're living the dream and there's a million other people who would take your spot.
You are in a remarkably easy position to be exploited when you are working your dream job. In baseball, they just had the unionization of the minor leaguers, who for a very long time, that was one of the reasons you wouldn't have seen why we didn't see unionizations, because we're chasing our dream and we don't want to upset our bosses. And even though we're living 5 people to a bedroom and all these types of things, and it trickles down to the employees. Yeah. It is, whatever, if you're a standard worker for a major professional sports team, you're probably making less money than you would in outside industry. And there is a line of people outside the door that they know they can just replace you with, and you're scared of that probably every day. So yes, sir, whatever you say, sir, I'll do it, and I'll work out 18 hours a day, and no, you won't give me overtime, and I'm so happy to be here.
On that thread, I think a lot of our listeners were surprised that on the podcast Corporate Gossip, we would do an episode about a Major League Baseball team. But when we got into the episode, we explained to our listeners, MLB teams in many ways are just as corporate as any other organization on the Fortune 500. They have the same types of performance objectives, the insular ownership structure, the same pay gaps. They use the same management consultants. Did that surprise you at all as you were doing your research?
Well, I think in a way it's a central part of the story. Is baseball for a long time, I think it's accurate to say, was not quite caught up with outside industry. These were toys to very rich people, and they were treating the businesses less as profit centers. Some people were still making plenty of money off of them, and every time they would sell, they would make money off of them. But there wasn't this ruthless efficiency, and the Astros are what you get when you start to apply that ruthless efficiency, and you have Jim Crane, the owner of the team, come in from the outside business world, and he brings in his ex-McKinsey consultant and Jeff Luno to run the team, and so really around 2010, after Moneyball comes out in 2003, you start to see this corporate movement, and now you look at every executive who runs a baseball operations department. They're all Ivy League. It starts to look like every other C-suite in America, where if you go back 20 years, teams were run by ex-scouts. They were run by people who for their life had been involved in player evaluation in a front office with a most of the time very different career track.
It's like, I think there's part of it where it's like they were possessed by the ghost of Ken Lay in Houston. And like, I even was thinking, I was like, man, if the smartest guys in the room wasn't a title already taken by another Houston organization swallowed by scandal, it would have also made a good title for this book.
Well, it's funny because he was very, unless I'm confusing my Enron main characters, I believe it was Ken who was very instrumental in the development, in getting Enron Field, which was the name of the Astros' original, the same ballpark, but the original name of it, built. He was leading the charge in trying to get the funding and the public support to do it, which is something I thought about exploring more in my book, and you run out of time and space, but there is an irony to that the guy who was really pushing for the stadium to be built, is running Enron.
Yeah. Well, and you can see Ken Lay being like, I want to buy a baseball team because it'd be super cool, or a baseball stadium because it'd be super cool to bring all my clients over to Enron Field. And it's almost the same with Jim Crane, where he's like, I don't really care which baseball team I get. I don't really have a passion for baseball. I have a passion for having something to talk about beyond an authentic hobby or interest, because the only other thing I know how to talk about is, what was it? Supply chain logistics, which like nobody wants to talk about.
They often say it's like the hardest club to get into is owning a sports franchise, right?
It's just like we were talking about it as if it's just like a social club for a lot of these guys.
Yeah, there's absolutely, it is a really exclusive country club. There's also the element of sport washing, which you're seeing with Jim Crane. I think it can rightly be assessed as part of what he's trying to do is, cleanse his reputation a bit.
Oh, right.
Steve Cohen of the Mets certainly could benefit from some reputation cleansing, and he's out there talking about the civic responsibility he has owning a baseball team, and I don't think people are going to forget his past, but look, Jim Crane was a college baseball player, and actually a pretty good one. So he does have that baseball element. It's not like he just entirely was divorced from baseball. He did have some appreciation for it, but yeah. And the other reality is these teams never sell for less than they are bought for. They only go up.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad bet for people with the kind of money it takes to buy these teams.
Also, the amount of tax deductions these billionaires can take on their teams is quite extraordinary.
To earn that level of money, you have to cross some people, right? So a lot of these guys have some bad background. I think Steve Cohen is one of them, right?
Yeah, we talk about you can't be a billionaire without being very comfortable with exploiting people. And so it's not surprising that anybody who would buy a company as a billionaire would exploit the people in the organization. Curious. Let's go back to the McKinsey consultants for a second. Is that still practice, do you think, that they're bringing in these consultants?
I haven't heard of it since then. It's certainly possible that some baseball team has had some arrangement with one of the big three and, come on in and look at our different operations. But I mean, this was a really unique and kind of damaging thing, as it turned out, with the history of the Astros, to bring in McKinsey to look at, not just the hot dog prices and the ticket sales, but actually baseball operations and how your manager, literally your field manager, is doing his job. I would, to your original question about things that might have had an impact, I gotta believe there might be some doubt or some pause people would give now before, proceeding with a similar engagement.
Yeah.
With one of these consulting firms, but who knows? Somebody will try it at some point. And it's not like it's the only time McKinsey's ever dealt with the sports team. That they had a time with the Knicks that went very poorly.
I would say that's a great legacy. Diverting money away from business villains, McKinsey is a great impact. Our fans will love that.
Do you think the league or the players union is using it? I know with an impending collective bargaining agreement coming up, McKinsey is certainly well versed in labor negotiations.
The league did use McKinsey for restructure. So when the current commissioner, Rob Manfred, under whom all this unfolds, when he took over, there was some reasonably assessed bloat. I mean, they probably did need some reorganizing, but he turns to McKinsey, and of course, a lot of heads get chopped, and this is back in 2015 or so, and that parallel I always enjoyed, that in a way, what the Astros are doing is paralleled by what the league office is doing too, and the league office ends up disciplining the Astros. But wait, aren't you both kind of pursuing the same efficiency objectives? You're both, engaging with McKinsey. The league has high-powered labor outside counsel, Proskauer Rose, and so that's if McKinsey gets involved with them on the labor side, I'm not sure. But
yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about Jeff Luhnow. I'm curious if you think that no matter what team scooped up Jeff Luhnow, if they would have ended up cheating, or if there was something in the water in Houston that made them especially vulnerable to him. And I know there was similar stuff going on with the Cardinals, but it definitely seemed like it was much, they were more vulnerable in Houston.
His time in St. Louis, so the one team he worked for prior to going to Houston, he ruffled feathers as well. There were questions of his leadership, and he was a divisive figure there. And so he gets to Houston, and he has free reign, which he didn't have in St. Louis. I think one of the better lines I might have in this meandering, long, rambling book is the Astros. It's hard to say the Astros were the team that was most likely to start cheating. Mm-hmm. I do believe they were the team that was most unlikely to stop cheating. That once cheating was unfolding. And why is that? And that's because the culture that Jeff Luhnow had built was really based on distrust and a lack of communication, and the mechanisms that you would need in place just inside your org chart, person A to person B, they weren't there.
Yeah.
It was a broken place, and at some point, something was going to catch up, whether it was the cheating or not. In a way, like one of the most interesting things I think about the book, and it's actually quite unsettling, is that the cheating is what makes everybody pay attention. If you take the cheating away, there was all this other crazy, I can curse in this podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
There was all this other crazy shit going on that people wouldn't have cared so much about because winning fixes everything.
Yeah.
They don't care about how you're treating your employees and all this. But, and then you also have this very public incident where the assistant general manager basically has he loses it in the clubhouse, screaming at a reporter, gets himself fired, accused of misogyny. It's just a really ugly incident. Something was going to catch up to this organization. There were too many things that they were doing that were ill-advised, and the culture was just, it was going to boil over. And so I guess that's an indirect way of answering the question.
No, I think that makes total sense. I mean, you have, right, we talked about people who are definitely not going to go against leadership because they don't want to lose their jobs. You have very few controls, and this culture that was very focused on one thing. It doesn't matter what, and also nobody being paid to do the right thing. Everybody being paid to do the wrong thing. I want more about Jeff Luhnow. So on this podcast, we like to dive into the psyche of these leaders. And so often we'll go back into their childhood and we'll find some trauma that they're kind of playing out as adults in their corporate life. We did that for Jim Crane. We found a decent amount for him. But for Luhnow, he was a little tougher to crack. What do you think was going on with him psychologically? Obviously, ego, there's maybe some narcissism, but do you have any armchair psychology?
I think both of those things are correct. and you can kind of still see them today. There's a lack of self-awareness he exhibits, and a love of the attention and the validation that comes along with leading a sports team and the success of a sports team. You know, he's still tweeting about the Astros years later, which you just don't see many executives who've left their position doing that. And you know, his prior job at petstore.com was in marketing. So there is some savvy as to how to kind of curry favor. And this is where he's an interesting character, because he is both smart, charming, and at times also quite awkward. You know, if you sit down with him for 45 minutes to an hour, I think most people would come away somewhat in awe of the guy. And I think the most dangerous people are the most charismatic, you know, but it's a lot of it. One of the episodes I was listening to, you're talking about, you know, the way people talk, the way consultants speak sometimes can be very commanding. And I think he had that. I don't know exactly where it comes from. I don't know, you know, he was raised in Mexico, comes to the States for during high school, goes to Penn, ends up in consulting. Brothers are in high-powered careers as well, but I don't know where exactly the ego or the narcissism develops. But you know, he was the first one to tell me about the. I was an English major, okay? I didn't know the business world and Jeff Luhnow did in some ways educate me. And I remember him explaining the concept, this is back in 2014, of being on the bleeding edge or being a fast follower. And, you know, I think he truly saw an opportunity after Moneyball comes out to be Billy Beane, you know, to be the next guy that everybody worships and says, wow, he's so smart. And look, he was at McKinsey in the 90s. I can only imagine what that was like.
Oh, my God.
At your time, in 2014, at that point, Moneyball had been out for 10, 12 years. Baseball was very much on the cutting edge of analytics. And I've read, you know, even since 2014, it's gone back to money completely, right? Everybody has an analytics team now. At that time, was that still the case? Where people were still pretty much bought into analytics, right?
It was still a burgeoning thing. And this is one thing that by the time he gets to Houston does play into his psyche, is there is a chip on his shoulder. He was, you know, the fights he had to live through in St. Louis, some of them self-inflicted, some of them to be blamed on kind of the poor change management ideas that the owner of the Cardinals had, which was no change management. They just dropped Luhnow in, and, you know, naturally fireworks arose. You know, look, there are still fights today over, you know, like, yes, does every team have an analytics department? Yeah. Are there still significant differences between some teams? Yeah. You know, the Rockies, I don't think have the same capabilities as the Dodgers. And so I think they're, you know, the gap is probably narrowed. But no, if you go back to 2014, there was still a lot of, or even 2011 when he takes over, there's still a lot of ground to be gained by R&D firepower and what you can invest in and what efforts you assign your resources to.
Right. Because it's hard to watch a game now and analytics not be brought up at least once but in the telecast, you know? I mean, you watch the game now and the guys have cards in the back of their pockets and it's telling them exactly where to play, and it's all driven by the analysts and models. So it's interesting to see the revolution of analytics.
Yeah, and it's you know, at the beginning, right, we're talking about, gee, we value walks, right, on base percentage, which was something that had been overlooked for years and years and years. And isn't that quite silly to overlook something as important as that? But now, you know, you're getting into the realm of artificial intelligence, and it just, you know, measuring physical body movements, and it's just, it's PhD level stuff, as opposed to more basic math that even then some teams weren't engaging with. Like, we're well beyond. We're not beyond wins above replacement, but you know, this all-encompassing statistic, but how you calculate it and the different things you can explore. I mean, the Astros 2017, 2018 start using high-speed cameras, and that's everywhere now.
Right.
You know, it's all arbitrage now, and it's all hedge fund behavior, and I sadly find a lot of it just uninteresting. when they're all kind of acting similarly and arguably rationally, it lessens the excitement of the sport to some degree. Like, if you wanted to watch a hedge fund, I think you'd watch something else. It's just, once you kind of see it for what it is, it's still a lovely game, but there's some shine that gets taken away from it. Oh,
you're killing the data analytics playboy here with those comments. I want to tap right on Luna one more time. So your time around the league, you've been covering the league for over a decade.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a guy like him before? I'm sure there's a lot of big heads in the clubhouse, but he's got to take the cake.
I don't have a character in baseball to whom I could compare Jeff Luna.
Wow.
How about a character in a movie?
What's that?
A character in a movie?
I'd have to think about it. Because he's not, to be very clear, he is not pure evil. And he is smart, and the Astros do a lot of really smart things in roster evaluation, right? They in some ways take pole position in a lot of these player evaluation methods and do at least further the revolution in that decade when he's there. It's just everything else that came along with it. And the way he would always position it is change is hard, and these are the things you have to do to get ahead. And I think that's the question that needs to then get explored is, did it have to be this ugly?
Yeah.
Do you have to do all the things that you did to achieve the results that you did? And I truly fundamentally believe, after interviewing, 100 plus people, the answer is no. And there are some quotes to that effect in the book, that there were bridges too far that they went over time and time again. They needed stop signs to be erected, and they never put them up. And that goes back to leadership at the end of the day. And he's somebody who has wanted credit at every turn for every little thing, including some things that really aren't his to be credited. And still to this day really takes no blame for the other side of it, right? There's something strange about saying all the good things are owed to me.
Yeah.
But the negative, no, please, that's somebody else.
It's giving like a little bit of like Arrested Development. Like, he's still a kid, a really talented, I'm thinking like a talented baseball player who can't play on the team, who doesn't know how to, win and lose together
in this industry, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he arrives in baseball as a detested figure by many in St. Louis. One of the stories is there was one day where one of the Cardinals front office people, Luno doesn't come into the office because someone else has threatened to kick his ass if he does, right? And John Mozeliak, who's still the runs baseball operations of the Cardinals, tells him, you got to stay home. So it is a messy environment. You can understand when you get to the Astros, you're like, I'm going to do it my way and screw everybody else. But there are costs to that,
I do have one more question. I think it's a $14 billion question. So how much cheating do you think exists in the game today?
The only way I can answer that is generally, which is that we have seen time and time again in baseball and outside. Like whenever there's incentive to cheat, people are going to try to cheat. I think it was very strange or notable, at the very least, last year, that there was one major league player that was caught by baseball's drug testing program. One. You mean to tell me that out of the entire population on a 40-man roster in the sport, only one person decided, I'm going to try to cheat this year? That doesn't line up with any of the historical testing numbers, doesn't line up with what we know of the sport. So I don't know specifically what people are doing. I'm not saying it's PEDs necessarily, but there will always be someone who wants to push the boundaries too far. Yes.
Yeah.
PED, performance enhancing drugs.
Whatever way you can.
Death taxes and cheating in baseball.
I want to talk about journalism, because we talk about journalism, journalists being the heroes in this story and a lot of our other ones. And there's so much crap that they have to deal with once they get the story before they publish. We just recorded an episode about AOL Time Warner, where the reporter who was saying that the Emperor had no clothes in the AOL Time Warner deal, his name was Alec Klein, or is Alec Klein, he had his phone tapped. Are there any instances where MLB owners are trying to intimidate sports beat writers?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't think this didn't make the book, but during the 2018, I've had just screaming matches with Jim Crane. I mean, these things happen. Any reporter kind of worth their salt at some point is going to, on a beat, whether you're in sports or outside of sports, end up in a confrontational adversarial moment, at least. And so it's not unusual that I, as a reporter, would end up having a screaming match with Jim Crane at some point. But, I remember him calling me up and trying to get me to kill a story and hanging up the phone and saying, lose my number. And we were yelling. Probably the funniest moment was there's a field in Cooperstown, New York, where the Hall of Fame is, called Doubleday Field, and we're behind it in the parking lot, just screaming at each other about I wanted to talk to him, and I think he had talked to one of the competitors, but he was trying to ice me out, and so I'm just yelling at him. This is back in like 2015, but during the 2018 playoffs, there were rumors of the Astros cheat. There was a lot of allegations flying around about, is this team cheating? Is this team cheating? There had been this Astros employee who had been caught near a dugout with a camera, and MLB gets involved. And this is during the same series when I end up learning about what they had done the year before. So this is a year later after the cheating, but the world doesn't know that the Astros had done the cheating yet. But I had to write, Jeff Passan at Yahoo has this kind of in-depth look at this guy named Kyle McLaughlin, who's this kind of low-level Astros employee who Crane had taken up from his golf course. And we're behind the press box, the hallway. And he notices me. He goes, Evan Drellich? Yeah. Keep my guy's name out of your story. And it's just like, or what, Jim? Right? And so there were, yeah, sure. There are always people, if you cover anybody negatively, they will, they'll try to pressure you in various ways, whether it's a funny interaction behind a press box or.
Yeah.
I want to tap on something real quick because you said you learned about it the day after. We rarely get the opportunity to talk to somebody who's got the story of their life. Do you realize it right then? You're like, holy shit, this is going to be huge.
I don't remember. Was it the day after? It was during that same series. There's a three game series. There were 3 games in Houston at that point. Yeah, I was in a hotel room in Houston at the Hotel Icon, downtown Houston, and it's. You don't treat it like a burden, but it's the immediate thought is, how could this be, and how do I get this? How do I get this? And like I'm starting to race through the starting steps of actually getting to the point of a story. And so yeah, no, I think I knew it was huge. I don't think I knew quite how huge at that point. But I always knew, when the story finally comes out, I tell Ken Rosenthal, who's my reporting partner, I don't think we're going to have a bigger story in our lives. And this is the day the story comes out. And he says, I'm not sure about that. And then he, a week or 2 later, I think he was pretty convinced of it. But, I knew it was a big deal at the time.
Yeah.
But I'd be lying, I think, if I knew exactly.
It's like, is it like a drug?
Is it like a drug?
That's how Dad always explained it. He's like, it's the best high of your life. You get a good story.
There was something kind of torturous about it because, in my case, I end up getting fired a few months later. And so I'm unemployed for, I learned about what happened in October of 2018. The story doesn't come out until November of 2019. So there's 13 months. And from February through May of 2019, I don't have a job. Right. And so you're sitting there thinking like, did I pass on the story of my life? Am I ever going to get it? It was, yeah, I think there is kind of a high or a certain feeling of accomplishment attached to getting the story done. But the process to it was really,
so
it's a lot.
You got it when you were at the Chronicle. left the Chronicle. Oh no,
I was no longer at the Chronicle. I'd left for Boston.
got it.
So I was a Red Sox reporter for a regional sports network, which is not the kind of place that is equipped to do this kind of work. And I'm glad I didn't try it. I started to work on it. I didn't trust the place. Lo and behold, they fired me. Still without a great explanation, although I had my suspicions that it was not a place that liked feathers to be ruffled. I'll say that. And then the Athletic hires me, and it was a bit of we didn't dive into it right away.
Yeah.
I mean, I was shell shocked a bit. It was, but it is a weird thing to look back on, having broken the story the same year I'd been fired.
Yeah.
That
Oh my
is a
God.
very strange thing.
That's like the dream redemption when you get fired in a way that you're not comfortable with, and then you're like, suck it. Like,
Yeah.
that must have felt so good.
I that part does feel good.
Yeah.
That was the worst place I'd ever worked. So I hope they're happy.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting though. I mean, ruffling feathers, right? Baseball is a very insular environment. Everybody knows everybody, so, word gets around and somebody says something and, people can pull strings, right? So that's unfortunate. But Rebecca, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, that's okay. I think, well, I do. So I was just mentioning a lot of we have students who listen to this podcast. A good chunk of them are journalism students who want to get into sports journalism. We also have MBA students, some of whom want to get into sports management. Do you have any advice for them, either cohort?
Yeah, I think the journalism, there's a lot of things to be very clear-eyed about the industry. It is a messy industry, just in terms of where is a stable place to work. I think there are, to do an Astros story or to do the hard-hitting type of stuff, you really have to be comfortable with being disliked or grow comfortable. And so there has to be assessments of, is that in your nature? What are you getting into sports media for? Is it to be around a baseball team, or is it because of a greater attachment to journalism and to the extent you can in sports, holding truth to account and all power to account. And so if you want to be around a sports team, that's okay. But I think it's good for people to start asking those questions relatively young about what kind of work do you want to do? Do you feel you're equipped to do? And for those who are interested in sports management, again, keep your eyes open to the stuff we were talking about at the start. Like these team owners have no fear exploiting you. I think there's a lot of great things you can do if you get into a management role at a sports team, and you can have a blast. But in both of these industries, like it's, what do you value? If you want kind of a comfy life where you're able to go out with your friends for a happy hour, like sports might not be it, because you're going to be working when you're on an opposite schedule of everybody else.
Yeah. So while we're not, a baseball podcast, living close to Cooperstown, I think, always gave me a love for league management and baseball in general. And I think Rob Manfred, also being an alumni of Cornell, which we hate Cornell.
Yeah, obviously.
So. I just saw that. So Rob Manfred announced that he's going to be done at the end of his contract in 2029. So we're 5 years away from that. He's pushed through a lot of changes to the league, some good, some bad. I personally enjoy the pace of play moves. Do you have any predictions for who's next and what the league needs next?
And we'll see if he actually does leave in 2029. It is still totally possible that this could be setting up you stick around for another couple. I don't think he's going to stick around for 10 years.
Negotiating tactic.
Yeah.
A little bit, there's a lot of different things that can happen. But presumably it's not too long after if he does leave. The next rule change that they're looking at would probably be some sort of implementation of the automated strike zone, which would be likely on a challenge basis. So, 3 times a game, if you think that pitch was a strike and the umpire called it a ball, you can ask for a review, as opposed to they've tested in the minors where it's literally every pitch is aided by this laser system. I don't know. I'm an English major. I don't know how it works,
Right.
but they have a way of using sensors to tell you whether the pitch was a ball or a strike. one of the interesting problems they've had with it is that the actual strike zone that gets called is not a perfect. It's not exactly as it's written in the rule book. I think it's a little bit more of an oval shape, and so can you get a machine to call the right shape? Beyond that, I think the interesting question is, how aggressively in this landscape where so much cord cutting is going on, leaves uncertainty for teams and how much money is coming in from TV deals. Mm-hmm. Do the owners then use that as an entree to push for a total change in baseball's economic system, i.e. try to push for a salary cap? That has been a third rail in baseball labor historically. If they try to do that, then you're probably looking at a very long work stoppage. That's my area of coverage these days. So beyond the on the field thing is a question of what happens during the next collective bargaining agreement, but we can talk about that in a couple of years.
Right. So what Evan's talking about is all baseball contracts are guaranteed, and the contracts are just out of control. I think what most people are probably aware of is that Shohei Ohtani is making $2 million a year for the next 7 years, and then 50 after that.
He has $700 million contract with all but $2 million annually deferred. So $2 million for 10 years, and then the next 10 years he collects $68 million a year,
regardless of whether he plays.
Correct. It is a guaranteed contract, and there's an interesting element of might he be able to potentially dodge, legally at the moment, some state income taxes
Nice.
with this setup. We'll see.
What's the next team you see percolating that's cheating? Or do you have any predictions of current cheating teams in some capacity?
I don't. I don't. That would be, boy, can you imagine my Twitter feed if I did that?
Could you imagine ours?
Probably the Binghamton Rumble ponies.
Yeah,
I gotta imagine.
I like them when they're the B-Mets.
Yeah.
More.
We used to work.
We used to work there, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, 2-for-1 nights.
Should have done a whole episode on that.
Yeah.
What about teams that you see? Do you see any team? And you don't have to
I
sit.
covered them a little bit.
Oh, really?
Do you see teams? You don't have to name names, but do you see any teams that you're like something fishy's going on here, or they're doing something a little bit off kilter that might get them in trouble later?
No, I think it goes back to this earlier question of do you think cheating is still going on? Yeah, but in what form? I don't know. One of the lessons you would think after the Astros is maybe you don't do something quite as overt as banging on a damn garbage can.
Sure.
Such that you can hear the audio, in clips years later. And so if teams are doing something now, in how does it show up? I don't know.
Less conspiracy, right?
Right.
Individual.
Look, how do you? This is the evil of the whole thing, is it makes you doubt what you see on the field because now that teams and players are capable of this. Well, what stops somebody from going to the plate with a buzzer? Nothing.
Right.
There's no TSA security scan before you go up there, right? So if somebody has the imagination and the balls to do it, you can kind of imagine what somebody could do. Like, could somebody go to the plate with a buzzer? Absolutely. Am I saying that somebody has gone to the plate with a buzzer?
Yeah.
No, I'm not saying that. But, whatever length you're willing to go to, there's always going to be some boundary you can push if you have a mind to do it.
It's like any fraud. We're never going to know what the next fraud is until it gets caught, and then we're never going to regulate that until 2 or 3 years later.
Yeah.
It's every
And
fraud
just
is
like
that
financial fraud, there's no real penalty, right? The players weren't penalized. Well, somebody comes along and cheats, other than PEDs, the league will evaluate it then. There's no hard set rules. Well, Manfred thinks he's drawing a line in the sand. It's really up to him and what the punishment is. In the union, right? The MLB union is...
Well, they're always going to defend the players, right? That's always going to be the case. And look, even my buzzer example, now that they've gone to this system where instead of putting their... It's optional, but a lot of pitchers now, gets called with the wrist device, right? So you'd have to hack that and then have your buzzer on you, right? It starts to get more and more extreme if you're talking about the pitch calling elements of it. But look, somebody's going to do something. I don't know that I'll be the one to break it. I might want some peace and quiet in my life at some point, but...
Anything else you want to plug? Where can people find you?
Just on Twitter at Evan Drellich.
Awesome. And you're writing for The Athletic?
The Athletic. sometimes confused for the Atlantic.
I almost said that.
Yeah. My own mother's done that, so it's really not a big deal.
And then go buy the book.
And go buy the book.
Yes,
You
go
can
buy the book.
find the link to Evan's book on our bookshop.org storefront. Yeah, some just general reminders. You can watch this interview and all of our other episodes on our YouTube at Corporate Gossip Pod. You can follow us on Instagram at Corporate Gossip Pod or TikTok at Corporate Gossip Pod. Email Becca@nighttoast.com or Adam@nighttoast.com. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so by buying us a coffee at the link in our show notes. I think that's it.
Yes, thank you so much, Evan. Really
Yeah,
appreciate
thank
it.
you. Yeah, this was awesome. And guys, we'll see you at the end of the week with a brand new episode. Thanks.